Ever get that feeling when a really complex idea just suddenly clicks and you sort of see how things work on a really fundamental level?
Oh, absolutely. Like unlocking a secret about life itself.
Exactly. And that's kind of the feeling we're going for in this deep dive.
Yeah. We're tackling a paper called Biology of Cognition, the Organization of the Living, Maturana's Key Insights by Capra.
Sounds a bit heavy, maybe.
It can seem that way, but honestly, it's packed with ideas from this biologist, Humberto Maturana, that can really shift how you view things. Basically, how living stuff is organized and how that connects to, the mind, cognition.
Right. And he was asking these really basic, but actually pretty profound questions like, what is life? What's its core organization? And then how do we perceive things? How does understanding even happen?
And the fascinating part is, at first glance, those seem like totally opposite questions, don't they?
Yeah, one's about basic biology, the other's about consciousness, almost.
Exactly. Like, what does a bacterium have in common with how we think and feel?
Yeah.
But Maturana sought that common thread.
So, our goal today for you listening is to unpack these ideas, make them clear, relatable. We know you're curious. You want those aha moments without wading through endless jargon.
Right. Get the insights quickly but thoroughly.
So let's jump in. Where did Maturana even start with this? What was his background?
Well, he had this really interesting path. Studied biology, did research in England, the U.S. He was actually at MIT for a while with Warren McCulloch.
Oh, the cybernetics guy.
The very same.
Yeah.
So he was influenced by that whole systems thinking, how systems regulate themselves. Then he went back to Chile, focused on neuroscience, specifically how we perceive color.
Okay, color perception. I see the link to brains there. But how does that lead to these massive ideas about all life?
That's the key connection he made. Studying vision, he realized the nervous system isn't just a passive receiver. It's not just taking snapshots.
Okay.
It operates more like a closed network. Everything's interconnected. A change in one part affects other parts, which affects the first part again. It's circular.
So not just input-output, like flicking a switch.
Not at all. It's a constant internal dance, you might say. And this was the big leap. He thought, what if this circular, closed organization isn't just the nervous system?
You mean?
What if that's the fundamental pattern for all living systems?
Wow. Okay, that's a big jump. From brains to, like, amoebas or plants.
Yeah, exactly. The hypothesis was this circular loop where the components that define the system are also produced by the system. That's the basic definition of being alive. A self-sustaining, self-producing loop.
A system that constantly rebuilds itself to stay itself.
Got it.
So how does that loop back to perception and cognition?
Well, he took it another step. He argued the nervous system isn't just self-organizing, it's also self-referring. Meaning, and this is pretty mind-bending, it means that what we perceive isn't a direct copy of reality out there.
Right.
And instead, when we interact with the world, our nervous system creates new connections of relationships within itself. Perception is an internal construction, triggered by the outside, but shaped by the inside.
So me seeing this microphone, my brain isn't just saying microphone exists. It's generating the experience of the microphone within its own network.
That's the essence of it. Your reality isn't received, it's enacted, created through that internal dynamic.
Okay.
And this led him to perhaps his most radical statement. Living systems are cognitive systems. And living is a process of cognition.
Whoa, hold on.
And he added, this statement is valid for all organisms, with and without a nervous system.
Okay, wait, so a bacteria knows. A tree is cognitive. That feels weird. That's not how we usually use those words.
It's definitely stretching the definition. He's using cognition very broadly here. Not necessarily conscious thought, but the fundamental process of self-maintenance through interaction. The very act of staying alive, of responding to the environment to maintain that self-producing loop, is a form of knowing, in his view.
Knowing how to survive, maybe. Knowing how to interact to keep going.
Precisely. It's about the functional interaction, the responsiveness needed to maintain the living organization.
Okay, I think I'm starting to grasp that connection. It's less about thinking about the world and more about how a living thing engages with the world to persist. Now, the paper emphasizes the pattern of organization. Why is that more important than, say, the actual molecules?
Yes, that's crucial. Maturana said the defining feature of life isn't the specific stuff it's made of, the carbon, the water, but the way that stuff is organized and interacts. The pattern.
Like?
Think about it. Take a living organism, and sadly, the moment after it dies.
Yeah.
The molecules are mostly still there, right? for a short while at least.
Yeah, pretty much the same stuff.
But the life is gone. Why? Because the pattern is gone. The dynamic, self-producing organization has collapsed. The relationships between the components are broken.
Right, the structure, the way it all worked together, that's what's lost. Not just the individual bricks, but the building itself.
Exactly. So understanding life means understanding that pattern, that network of interactions. This links back to the cybernetics influence, too, studying organizational patterns.
Right.
And this specific pattern, the self-making one, has a name, right? Autopoiesis.
Autopoiesis, yes. It's a term he coined with Francisco Varela. Literally means self-making.
Self-making. Yeah.
It describes this unique organization of living systems we've been circling around.
So it's not just self-organizing, it's actively producing itself. Constantly.
Exactly. And they distinguish between organization and structure here. It's a key point.
Okay.
Organization is the abstract set of relationships that define the system as a particular kind of thing, like the essential carness of a car or cellness of a cell. It's the blueprint.
Right.
Structure is the actual physical components.
Yeah.
The specific molecules, the cells, the organs, and how they're physically related at any given moment. The actual metal, plastic cells.
I getcha.
Autopoiesis refers to the maintenance of the organization, the blueprint, even while the physical structure is constantly changing, turning over, replacing parts.
Ah, okay. So my body is constantly replacing cells. My structure changes, but the underlying pattern, the meanness that keeps me alive, that organization persists. That's the autopoiesis.
That's a perfect way to put it. The network of processes is constantly regenerating the components and maintaining the overall pattern.
Okay, this is clicking now. We're self-making systems, but obviously we don't exist in a vacuum. We interact with the world. How does that interaction work in this model?
Good question. That brings us to structural coupling.
Structural coupling.
The idea is that whenever a living system interacts with its environment, that interaction triggers structural changes within the system.
Triggers, but doesn't determine.
Exactly. The environment perturbs the system, it provides a trigger, but the system responds according to its own structure, its own internal organization. The environment doesn't specify how the system changes. The system determines its own response.
The paper had that example, kicking a stone versus kicking a dog.
Right. It's originally Bateson's example, I think, but it fits perfectly.
Yeah.
You kick a stone, it moves predictably based on physics. Force, mass, trajectory.
Yeah.
You kick a dog, and please don't.
Uh,
The response is totally different.
right. It might yelp, run, bark, bite. Who knows?
Exactly. The dog's response depends on its internal state, its history, its dogness. The kick is just a trigger. The dog's internal structure determines the specific reaction. The energy for the response comes from the dog, not the kick.
That makes so much sense. I mean, think about how different people react to the exact same news story or comment. We all filter it through our own stuff, our own structure.
Precisely. We are structurally coupled to our environment, but our responses are self-determined based on that structure. And this constant coupling leads to ongoing structural changes.
Which sounds a lot like learning.
It is learning in a fundamental biological sense. Structural coupling is the mechanism of learning changing structure and thus behavior based on interactions and experience.
Wow. So learning isn't just something we do in school. It's woven into the fabric of being alive and interacting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And since every organism has a unique history of interactions, a unique sequence of structural couplings.
We all end up with slightly different structures. We become individuals.
Exactly. That's the biological basis of individuality.
Yeah.
Even identical twins, exposed to slightly different triggers, will develop structural differences over time. And our current structure is, in effect, a record of our past interactions.
So living systems have a history embedded within them. Our development, our ontogeny is the story of those structural changes.
That's the idea. Ontogeny is a history of structural drift through coupling.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the system's response is determined by its structure. The paper calls this structural determinism. That sounds a bit fatalistic, like we have no free will.
Yeah, it can sound that way, but it's a nuanced concept. It means the system's actions are determined by its current structure. What it can do is set by what it is at that moment. But, and this is the crucial part, that structure is the result of its own history of autonomous changes triggered by interactions. It wasn't imposed from outside. So while your actions are determined by your structure is determined by your history of living.
Ah, I see. So it's not predetermined by external forces, like a puppet. It's determined by the self-made history embedded in my structure. My past actions and interactions shape my present possibilities.
You've got it. determined by its own autonomous history, not by the immediate external trigger. It's a kind of operational freedom within structural constraints.
Okay, that feels less like being a robot and more like, well, like choices stemming from who I've become.
A good way to think about it. Now, later on, Maturana and Varela refined how they talked about cognition.
Oh, how so?
Instead of just saying living is cognition, they increasingly associated cognition specifically with the process of structural coupling itself, the dynamic interaction with the environment.
So cognition becomes less about just existing and more about the doing of interacting, the dance between system and environment.
Exactly. And this leads to another really profound idea. Bringing forth a world.
Bringing forth a world.
Yeah. Since the living system, through its structure, determines which environmental events count as triggers, which perturbations cause changes. It's essentially defining what's relevant in its environment. It carves out its own world of significance from all the potential interactions out there.
So the world isn't just passively there waiting to be perceived.
No. The organism actively brings forth the world it lives in through the very act of structural coupling. Cognition isn't about representing a pre-existing world, it's about creating a world through the process of living.
That's wow. So my reality of the world I experience is something I'm co-creating moment by moment through my interactions based on my structure.
That's the radical implication. And that phrase, to live is to know, gets deeper meaning. Living is the continuous process of structural coupling, and that coupling is cognition, the bringing forth of a world.
And this applies even without a brain. Plants, bacteria, they're bringing forth their own worlds too, in this sense.
In their own way, yes. They interact, they maintain their autopoiesis through structural coupling, they define what's relevant in their environment. It's cognition embedded in life itself.
This really changes how you think about mind and brain, then.
It simplifies it, in a way. The mind isn't some ghostly thing in the machine. The mind is the process of cognition, the process of living, the process of bringing forth a world.
And the brain.
The brain is a specific, incredibly complex structure that allows for certain kinds of structural coupling, certain kinds of cognition, especially in animals. But the whole organism participates. Cognition isn't located just in the brain. It's a property of the whole living system interacting.
Okay. And what about us humans? The paper mentions language.
Right. Maturana saw language as a unique human domain of structural coupling. It's how we coordinate our behavior, our interactions with each other in a very complex way.
Through shared symbols, meanings.
Exactly. And through language, we don't just bring forth individual worlds, we bring forth shared worlds. We live in networks of conversations.
Like that quote, "The world everyone sees is not the world, but a world which we bring forth with others."
Precisely. Our shared reality, our culture, our understanding of things, it's all built and maintained through these linguistic interactions, this co-creation in language.
That really hits home. You think about how conversations literally shape how you see a situation, or even yourself. We build our worlds together with words.
We do. And that includes our inner world, too. Our thoughts, self-awareness, that's also intertwined with language for humans.
This has been quite a journey, so let's try to boil it down. The core idea is living things are fundamentally self-making systems. Autopoiesis, they constantly interact with their environment, triggering internal changes, structural coupling. This process of interaction is learning, it creates individuality, and it is cognition, the active bringing forth of world.
You've nailed it.
And this whole process blurs the lines between mind, body, life. It's all part of the same fundamental dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. A unified view of life and knowing.
That really makes you reconsider things. So a final thought for you listening. Mull over this idea of bringing forth a world. How does knowing that your interactions are actively shaping your reality change how you view maybe your relationships or your impact on things?
Yeah, how does your personal history, your unique structural coupling color the world you experience every day? It's definitely something to chew on.
It really is. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us into Maturana's world.